One of the Christian doctrines that makes the least sense to me is the idea that God's law in the Bible is this transcendent spiritual measuring stick that has the power to lead us to death if we don't follow it to a T. This idea is especially outlined in the book of Romans and a few others attributed to Paul. However, looking at the different commands within the Bible makes this idea seem silly to me. Let's take the laws regarding slavery, for example. Christians often present the enslavement laws as kindness, a safety net for people who would otherwise enter lifelong debt and poverty.
This was actually an anti-poverty program.
I won't argue against that in this video, but I will say that even if that is true, it's not so for everyone. Yes, Exodus 21 says that Israelites who are enslaved had to be released at the end of a 6-year period, or a 49-year period if you go by Leviticus. However, Leviticus 25 also goes on to make it clear that this is not a privilege extended to the non-Israelite enslaved. They were to be enslaved for life. They and their descendants could be passed down as property, inherited just like land and livestock. Let me state that again. The law that God gave to Israel outlines allowance of permanent enslavement of the outgroup as property. This might be hard for many Christians to hear, but that is chattel slavery, the ownership of human beings. Not only that, but it specifically outlines a clear in-group, out-group delineation, meaning that Israelites were to be allowed rights that non-Israelites were not to be granted. Considering that there is no punishment for beating one's enslaved so long as the enslaved does not lose a body part and recovers after a day or two, that hardly seems fair. Yet, this is the law that is supposed to be so transcendently good and holy that deviating from it means someone is worthy of hellfire. When I was a Christian, I believed that the law that God gave to Israel was not only good, but beneficial if the people would follow it. It was supposed to be a gift, a guide to the best possible way to live on this earth. However, is that true? Well, to answer that question, I think a quote from my fellow YouTuber, Vice Rhino, would be very useful.
Now, sometimes these rules are said to have been put in place for the benefit of humanity. Like, don't eat pork isn't because God hates pigs, despite having made them. It was because pork is a harder meat to cook safely than others. Never mind that chicken is allowed and it's an even more difficult meat to cook than pork. But when we look at the laws against planting different crops in one field, that's actually detrimental. Some crops are complementary, and crops like beans actually aid in nitrogen fixation in the soil, so planting beans alongside plants that have high nitrogen requirements, like wheat for instance, can give you better yields for both crops than you would get from planting either one on their own, and as a bonus it takes up less land to do so. Also, beans provide good habitats for beneficial insects that help protect other crops from parasites and other pest insects. Why would God prohibit complementary crops in farming? Surely the Creator would know which plants play nicely together and so could provide helpful instructions along those lines instead of just outright banning it, right?
This one is an interesting example because it comes along with other commands against mixing things. Mating two different kinds of animals, wearing clothes made from two kinds of fabric, and plowing a field with an ox and a donkey. When I was going to church, someone told me that it's possible that this had symbolic meaning about marrying unbelievers, which is something that other parts of the Bible express. What I will say though, is that taken at face value, this interpretation is not there. If that's what it's supposed to mean, then God was doing a bad job at showing us our sinfulness there. Anyway, back to my main point. The law is supposed to be a spiritual tool that points us towards our sin, right? It's supposed to be good, just, and the beginning of wisdom and sound mind. And yet, as far as I can see in the examples above, it looks just like the words of a people who were so concerned with tribalism that they created laws along those lines. One of my Christian friends makes a point of saying that sin, deviation from the law, brings death. But that can't be true as far as I can see. It's not that we just, poof, end up in hell just like that. God is supposed to put us there. That makes a huge difference. Let me explain. There's a dilemma written by the Greek philosopher Plato called the Euthyphro dilemma. A modern monotheistic version of it goes as follows. Is something good because God commands it? Or does God command it because it is good? Meaning, does or did God decide what is good? Or is goodness something beyond even Him? If He decides or decided what is good, then that means He created an existence in which doing things that, as far as I and others like me can tell, are either neutral or beneficial, would be bad enough for Him to burn us in hellfire. These arbitrary things that He doesn't care to explain how or why they are so bad are enough that He would burn us. Why is or was it so important to God that Israel not enslave each other, but be free to enslave outsiders? And the idea that He provides a way of salvation doesn't make things any better, in my opinion. He decided we were sick, and then gave us a cure which is literally the freedom not to be burnt by Him, which we would not need if He had not decided we were so sick that He needs to burn us. And why did He decide that this is a sickness anyway? Sure, everybody has their preferences. Why does He have the right to burn us just because we do something He doesn't like? Most of us don't really like the idea of might makes right, but it seems believers are okay with it if it applies to God. Now, if God doesn't or didn't decide what is good, then wouldn't He be even more understanding of our plight? Maybe He'd be more inclined to explain why these things are so bad that He'd burn us? Maybe some Christians out there would say that the law that condemns us to hell is not the law of Moses, but some spiritual law found in the New Testament. But Romans 5 says otherwise, I think. That's just my idea of why the so-called law of God makes no sense. Thank you very much for joining me. Like, subscribe, and let me know what you think. Bye.